Welcome to Lawyers Who Learn, where we explore how attorneys' engagement and lifelong learning fuels their growth. Join us to uncover these journeys and gain insights for your legal career.
Michael Grupp, welcome to Lawyers Who Learn. I'm excited to go through your learning and growth journey. I know you have a lot to share, so thanks for joining me today.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. I'm going to take a few seconds just to share your background to save you some time so you don't have to do it later on. And then we'll dive into it. And then I'll see how you can grade me if I got everything right. You started your legal career in Freshfields and Hogan Lovells, but then you turned into, you became an entrepreneur. Your first company, if I'm pronouncing this right, was it Thesis?
Yeah, Thesis, yeah.
Thesis, which was a recruiting platform, which you ended up selling. You're also a faculty. You've been a faculty at, I can't pronounce it, Biercerus Center?
Serious Law School.
Center of Law on Legal Profession. And then now you're currently a lecturer at, I can't read my handwriting, but Goethe University.
It's the Goethe University at Frankfurt.
Okay, fantastic. I love teaching is the best form of learning. I want to dive into that a little bit too. I love that you've done that. And of course, now you're the founder of Bryter, which is a workflow management company, AI, now also contract extraction, AI assistant. You've raised $90 million. You have 200 employees in, I think, 3 different countries. So did I catch the gist of it? Fantastic.
That's absolutely right. The teaching engagements are almost, I think, obligation towards society, so I can complain about legal education, and I buy my right to complain and criticize by sacrificing a couple of days a semester to go to law school and talk about what worked and what didn't. And in fact, there is an actual academic curriculum behind that, and I talk about the origins of legal technology and the sort of emerging scene of legal tech and innovation in the market. So there is like a curriculum as a baseline, but I still think it's the courses that you should teach people because they never get exposed to them ever, and they have to learn something that I think bots can probably do 80% of the time by the time they get to market. So I think it's irresponsible to have young people study all that stuff, of which most of the things, at least in the German and European curriculum, is not necessary. So that's the detour to the academic world. And then, yeah, of course I do Bryter. That's my main job, and I run the business.
Awesome. We're definitely going to dive into your thoughts on legal education with how fast things are changing. I do want to start, though, with, to me, what stands out the most about you. It's your sense of humor. It's your energy. And I don't know you that well, but I have seen you in person and I've seen your podcast, and just that's the persona you give. And I'll give a great example. The first time that I met you was at Legal Geek 1 year ago, and you were hosting a session. It was called something like Hot Takes or something to that degree, where you had to ask you a question, and anybody who stumped you, you had to take hot sauce. And I had my claim to fame was I was the only one who was able to stump you guys that you couldn't answer the question. And the question was, which legal tech vendors in the back room would not survive? If you wanted to go there, maybe we'll dive into that. But you did take that hot sauce and you enjoyed that. I think it was with Nikki Shaver from Legal Tech Hub, was one of the
100%. Richard Troman's was also on the show.
Exactly, Richard Troman's. And then I've seen your podcast, like just the intro to your podcast is funny. The questions that you ask, even you were at Legal Geek recently, you're going around. So just curious, take me through, is that a good sort of perception? Is that sort of who you are? And even just like your description, I'll start with this. I literally laughed out loud. One of the question I asked you, what is a hobby that you have? And you wrote, I'm a big wine lover, but I do triathlons. So the constant conundrum is, should I drink or should I train? And I think that sort of sums up most people. Which way do we want to go, serious or funny? So how do you decide when you're building a 90 million plus company that you've raised and you 200 people, which direction to go?
Yeah, that's funny. It's a question nobody ever asked me. There is, I think, a turning point in how much personal vibe you allow yourself to have in your professional life. And ironically, this is something that, in a weird way, AI, I think, brought to the industry. So even in that very personal question, I have to add that sort of the last 3 years in the legal world have changed that, because everybody has become more real because things move so fast that I think people are more in a weird way laid back because you can't pretend less. I think everybody's invited to be more real. There's a weird vibe going on that you can just bring yourself to work and just be real in yourself, and you'll be more impactful because that's essentially what matters. And it's less so the perfect facade and structure that you set up about who you want to represent. And I think we're living in a time that changes so fast that this is happening. And it wasn't like an overnight thing. I think I started my career being way more traditional. If you start being a lawyer in a firm, you have a image you work towards, dress for the person you want to be. But I think life is hilarious. Life is deeply sarcastic. I think things in life are funny. There are some incredibly funny books that describe that. And that's a part of my personality. So at some point, I just allowed this more in my professional life. When I give presentations on stage, they're not comedy, but I want people to laugh. Like I want people to actually have a good time. And I want them rather to remember this talk as being like, in any way inspirational and funny, rather than Michael had a great slide about the strategic impact about yada and like this. Don't get me wrong, this shouldn't be shallow, but it should still, I think, be real and in any way remarkable rather than being polished. And that's just something that changed, I think.
That goes to a really great saying is people will remember how you make them feel versus what you say.
100%.
And it is, I actually trained with a coach for several months. I did a full comedy routine in a New York comedy club, and it was one of the hardest things I ever did. And I have the YouTube video to prove it. But the laughter and the energy, like that is your reward for that. And like I've seen, if you can, I don't know, I've read a different thing on public speaking. You don't have to be so formulaic about it, but every 10 minutes or so, if you can break up with a laugh or something, just break up here's what I'm talking about. Here's our metrics to get people to pause. But are you formulaic about it, or you just go off the cuff? Like I'm reading.
No, I am. I can't hold the tension of seriousness for too long. So I'm not formulaic in the sense that I'm counting slides that I said, here needs to be an accent. This is almost something coming out of the stuff. I think, to be honest, at the core, it's not even comedy. It's the desire to think about how to really basically cut the crap and get to the real thing. Isn't it funny that, for example, in life, in private life, everywhere, we are using images and direct language and all the things to express ourselves in a really super fast and impactful way. But when it matters most, when it's really about money and power and doing things, we are beginning, like we speak jargon and we are incredibly like obfuscating stuff and polishing things. Walk through Ilticon or Legal Week and look at the event stands, driving impact, like all the buzzwords of enterprise marketing that are around, when the real message is really about what do you really do? And you have 1 second to explain, because that 1 second is worth a lot of money. Why don't you cut to the chase? And in any speech you deliver or everything you do, I'm sometimes trying, like there's like the official part I'm doing, like this is the official explanation. Yeah, but then I would pause and I'd say, what does that mean? Like for real, like between you and me, what's the actual meaning behind that? And this is where then often I can't help but having a also like a slightly like humoristic or funny add to this because by already drawing the picture as it really is, we're a company, we want to have a lead and we're paying money for that lead. There's something funny about the fact that you would just pay a lot of money and do a lot of effort to actually get a lead, right? This is just like incredibly funny. So there's so many things where you then end up actually having people giggling a bit.
Well, just work in general is funny. What are you doing? So I was watching some podcasts of yours just in prep, and I loved one of the questions, which was, if you were giving a TED talk, what would the topic be? And you had said, nobody knows what they're doing. And so I think that kind of is a nice build on what you just said. Nobody knows what we're doing. So what we're going to do is give a lot of jargon and put it up there. But of course, obviously, a lot of people are very smart doing smart, interesting things. But as an entrepreneur, I can relate to that. Any company, and when we're looking at it, is we're trying to figure out what the next phase is. So can you take us, this is Lawyers Who Learn. A lot of legal tech entrepreneurs watch this program. We just were at the ClioCon Summit. I was in the exhibit hall interviewing Jack Newton from Clio and diving into how he scaled his company. Take us through a little bit about what you've learned as you're building Bryter as your second company, and while you don't know what you're doing, so other people can understand that.
Yeah. So we're not done with the story, so it's always hard to look back and say this is what worked, this is what didn't, because actually ultimately I don't know yet. But so far there are things that look like they work, so happy to explore a little bit. The idea of Bryter, the core idea, is not something that is very new. It was something that sort of lawyers wrote about since the invention of IT and since the invention of modern legal societies, that you can express legal thinking through rules, that basically law is a form of code, that it's conditional logic. It's if this, then that there's a structure.
It's like engineering in a way.
Exactly. And you can express that in code, in pseudocode, in visualizations. So the core idea of Bryter was that just like other industries have production lines for cars or manufacturing lines for things where you have repeatable processes running, that lawyers and regulatory professionals have the same repeatable processes that are running, but they can't actually standardize and then automate because they can't make this explicit. They can't visualize it and share it with people and show it. So the idea was give people a way to make a process explicit, aka a drawing canvas for their process. And then the second step, allow them to automate that process, which allows you to basically make every process that you have that is happening often enough for you to make the effort, draw it, maybe even optimize it, and then automate it. And that allows people to then turn an abstract concept that runs in your head and basically is your work into an actual enterprise app. So in other words, people were able to like have intake workflows or any kind of process that they are required to do repetitively on a daily basis and turn it into an app. And we then gave people the ability to build an app out of that. We called it a Lego for lawyers, a toolbox, and you can now turn any process that is repetitive into an app and automate.
I love the Lego for lawyers because, to your point, even though that's a tagline, what is that one line or two lines that give a description of who you are and what you do, like you were just talking about at the trade show? And so that is, okay, we can fit different pieces and put it together.
Yeah.
So can you, for a moment, just put yourself in like the entrepreneur, legal tech entrepreneur who's trying to raise money, right? As we all say, and I heard you say recently, legal tech is having its moment. What was the process what were some of the things you learned as you went through different rounds of fundings that somebody else who's is going maybe to the Legal Tech Fund Summit and trying to raise money for the first time? What are things that they can do to help them?
I think the world has changed a little bit, so I can't really give advice about how you would start a pre-seed company today and raise money without having a product or anything meaningful in your hands. But how we did it now, I think to some extent it would be working is at the end, investors buy proven scale. They don't know what you're doing. They have no idea about what really works. They are not masters of your problem that you're solving most of the time. So they're really they need a proxy for scale and traction, and that's all they need to have. So just think about what's the traction for every stage that people are specifically interested in. Like what's the traction you need to have at an idea level, at a team level, a pre-seed level, a seed level? Like what is the proxy for traction, and have that. And this can come down to, I have a great co-founder. This is whatever, like X OpenAI. This is X Palantir, X Google. This is the team. The traction is I convinced somebody who's so good to do that. Here we go. Find a proxy for traction that people can relate to, understand, and it leads to something. And then of course, that's the traction. And then you need to have a sort of tangible explanation of the problem you're solving. I think that's the two big things. The rest is building around this. The really good investors understand that the old saying of your market is not big enough isn't really working anymore. Good investors know that the world is changing so fast now that everything that counts is basically like, can you see your next 3 steps? You don't have to plan ahead for 3 years. Nobody asks you to do that. So do you have enough traction to get your new round? Do you have traction for a problem that I think personally is interesting? And that's it, what you solve. So ideally, you can make this problem relatable to the investor you're looking for. Like best thing is they have some sort of a lock-in, and that's it, like at any stage.
Yeah,
if you guys
sure.
CSP, you just scale that.
No, and I appreciate that because at the end of the day, there's no magic answers, right?
Yeah.
It's a problem that you're solving. You got to hustle to put it out there. And there's a lot of there's a lot of money and opportunity. You just have to have a real problem that you're solving.
Yeah. By the way, David, funny side story. By the time when we raised money the first time, legal tech wasn't a cool thing to be raising money at. Like, it was not a cool industry. 2019, our first round investors were Excel. They did not have legal tech companies in their portfolio, at least not companies they would consider legal tech. There were some that now we would maybe call legal tech, but at the time this was a new thing. I think my secret hack at the time was to always raise money from horizontal investors, pretend like telling them we were solving a horizontal problem. We would start in legal, and this would be coming out of legal, but this would become a horizontal thing for more business areas like financial service, compliance, etc. And they would always look at it as a huge, gigantic horizontal business, but they would like the echo chambery traction you had in one industry to then iterate from that. So we would raise money from people outside of legal to then solve a legal problem. If you would go to legal tech investor back in 2019, there wasn't a lot of money to raise. This was not a great space to be in.
Just out of curiosity, when you said that, were you really planning on going horizontal, or was it just part of the...
It's not that we knew we wouldn't do it. I think we thought people from procurement, compliance, and other areas taking interest in that. So there was I think it's something you can easily believe in, that you plan to do that one day. There were many things I planned to do one day.
Totally. It wasn't out of the realm of things that
exactly.
Happen. Yeah, I totally get it. And I love that hack. So thank you for sharing that, because there's always a third door to get into if you can't go in the first or second. I don't know. Are you familiar with what Lawline does?
Yeah.
Great. So we provide online CLE courses, and a lot of what we're trying to focus on now is preparing attorneys for the future of law. Obviously, AI is a big part of that. We have an AI hub. It's a lot of what you talk about every time I've seen you talk, it's about what does the future of law look like? And that's essentially what you went around Legal Geek and asked everybody that question, and nobody could predict it. So I'm going to ask you to predict it a little bit, but just the question I would have is, when you think about law schools and what you're teaching there, when going back to that topic, is the current framework of law school, at least in the US, it's a little bit different. 3 years. I don't know if there's an apprenticeship program in Germany. I know there's in the UK. There's not in the US. What needs to change? And what needs to change to get everybody up to speed from day one?
Yeah. So I think we're in the middle of the change. So we haven't seen it through yet, and we haven't seen the world with AI, because there's no world after AI, right? So there's a world that embeds AI in everyday life and in everyday professional life as a lawyer. We have this funny discussion currently about how will AI have an impact on the first year associates, the second year associates, and suddenly we run out of people who can actually do your job because nobody got trained on the job. And I think the discussion misses the point that the world will change, and it's the first year and second year associates that are the first ones to actually use the tools and the ones that shape their job using that. These new jobs will inform us about what we have to learn and what the new skills are that become important. So ironically, we're looking at this curriculum from a very traditional point of view, thinking about what makes a lawyer. And from that understanding of today, what makes a lawyer, we then infer that this is what a lawyer needs to learn. And then we say, but this gets impacted through AI, so we will run out of trained lawyers. Instead of thinking, we're in the middle of a change where the role of what a lawyer is gets changed, at least to some extent. It gets redefined, and maybe there are different roles, and this will tell us what we need in the future. So this is a little bit of a flip view in this, but I'm not afraid that the first years will vanish and go away and there's nobody to train there. I would actually think that this is the generation that will teach us where you can leverage technology the most. And so I have a more optimistic view on this, but I still think the legal education is outdated in that. And there are some areas we already see now that are just, I think, unnecessary. One, the way we do drafting, research, and some core legal tasks in finding information in big documents, summarizing information in big documents. I think these are things that we don't have to learn anymore. That's like training on the job, unnecessary. And if you think about how much training on the job and also training at law school goes into learning how to formulate an opinion, draft a brief, draft an opinion, you don't have to learn that anymore to that extent. What about project management? What about the business of law? What about selling legal advice? What about client relationships? What about negotiation tactics? There's so many things that people have absolutely no idea. And we're not even talking about tech topics, right? Like the actual functioning of this. This is all the business of law. In Europe, especially in Germany, this is like the official goal of legal education. That, by the way, takes 8 years. Okay. So if you're incredibly fast, you can do it between 6 or 7 years, but there's no way you can shortcut that. Like, really? You will end up being a judge. So it's the education to become a judge. People think that the default job you will take after that is work as a judge, which 95% of people won't. They will end up being a lawyer or working in a house or going somewhere else. So we are having an education system that prepares you for something you're not ending up doing. So being a lawyer, this is not what nobody tells you. There are like almost like years in this education that are essentially useless. And we have to change thinking about that, and we need to remodel it. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a hindsight bias of everybody who did it, because people enjoy the fact that they had to go through this, so they don't see a point in changing it because they had to do it. So the new generation might as well do it as well. And that's, I think, a painful way of looking into this.
In the US, at least, something like 90%, I'm sure it's all over the world, of attorneys are in small firms, small to mid-sized firms. You were at Legal Geek. I don't know if you heard or had a chance to look at part of the keynote presentation that Jack Newton gave at Clio.
I looked into some of the stuff later on. Something was recorded, so I got an overview. I'm curious about what's going on.
Yeah. So as you're probably aware, they acquired, or they're in the process of acquiring, VLEX at Fastcase. And so what they did in their platform had, and this is what I interviewed him about, they had 2,500 people in the room. Every announcement they made, you could literally, like, parts, we thought everyone was going to applaud and go crazy. It was dead silent. And what they were sharing was what they were shipping out. What they said now is they were combining the business of law, which was the law practice management suite, and then the practice of law, which was all the automation from Vincent and all the legal research, and putting it into one platform. And they were adding AI agents to that and all the automation that comes with that. And they literally showed you, and you took you through a matter that you get from a client, from it extracting all the information to actually creating and writing the briefs that you needed and putting it on there and scheduling it. And it became this thing where it was the first time, because when I heard about Vincent in the past, I'm like, yeah, I understand it, but that was like, I've never used it. I've never understood it. And he just brought it into the mainstream. And for the first time, I got a sense of what a future could truly look like, potentially, without the billable hour, because he literally took 10 hours of work and put it into 45 minutes. So, sorry, I was just trying to give you a sense of what the presentation was. And attorneys were, from my end vendors, were a little bit nervous, because a lot of what vendors do a lot of competition might be gone. And from an attorney, what are they going to do if they can't bill that 10 hours, or everything changes? So I was curious. I know you're always thinking about big law because that's where you are. What do you think when you hear about something like that's coming to market now and will be evolving in the legal ecosystem?
I think that the lawyers aren't that different, to be honest. I think the impact of smaller firms are maybe not as big, just because lawyers in a direct contact with clients are maybe doing more messy stuff and more diverse things, and like more like hands-on things that are not that easily repetitive, standardizable, automatable. If you have a bigger unit where you can easily centralize stuff and streamline things, and you have also specialists for specific jobs, even if the tool empowers you to do more, I think the impact for the smaller individual practitioners are not as big, at least from how I see the market, from like comparing the things you can automate today. But I'm torn, put it that way. Nobody knows the answer. Nobody has a clue. So I'm not an exception to that. I maybe I have more data because I constantly ask people around that, but honestly, even based on this data, I'm like torn. There are two not super extreme views to this, but there are two views that are not the same, and I'm oscillating between the two. One is that lawyers have an imposter syndrome. They underestimate how much work they do that is important to their clients and quite valuable, that is not automatable and not that simple, and is not research and not drafting and not that stuff. And I think lawyers sometimes think that just because they're smart people, they used to work hard, that a lot of the work they do is just so easily automatable. And just because they see that this tool could give them the clause they've been looking for half an hour into an instant, that this would flip their work upside down. But it doesn't, because you pick up the phone, you speak to these people, you meet them, you shake their hands, you listen to them, you maybe ask some questions back. There's so much stuff that goes into the handling of that case, the trust building and that factor, that I think people, the lawyers especially that are used to just grind, and this is true for big law as much as it is for smaller firms, they underestimate how much they do. That's one view. So I would then think, based on this, it's not different than online research in the 2000s, where people thought, we have this huge library and our clients come to us because we have the library and we have access to this legal information. We're the only ones who can read it, and our clients don't have this huge library. And now that everybody has access to this digital library for $100 a month, they will all go away and they will do their own research and have access to that. None of this changed. Like, legal research got better. Legal research got more advanced, benchmarks got up, but lawyers, like law firms especially, didn't lose work to their clients just because they could self-serve the same digital library. It didn't change anything. So this is the more conservative, nothing will really change view.
Yeah.
Then you could have a different view that is not super different, but it's just like looking at the data in more like numbers wise, and you think if there's a 20 to 30% hit on some use cases, this will already change the industry a lot. Like, marginal impacts will still have a huge impact into the total thing. So example, we have a customer that has it's not even a mass claims project, it's a repetitive claims project where you have a client that sends them the same type of claims on some manufacturing good, and they have to write a brief responding to that claim. And they do this in currently 2 to 3 hours using templates and document automation, but using AI in the workflow, they can do this in 3 minutes. So they get the same draft, they cut 80% of the time. So the client asked them to automate this, and this is a 6-digit thing, and it will go down to a 5-digit thing. So there's, 60, 70% of the client's money is gone. So then you're like, okay, the other things they can do more. And then this famous Silicon Valley sentence is finally focus on the things that matter most, which is the complex legal. No, this stuff is gone. Like, you don't focus on that stuff anymore because your client doesn't pay you for that. If you look at this and then you zoom out and you see these little pockets of automation happening everywhere, then the market does contract. So it is then having an impact on the total number of attorneys. And then I think there's a counterbalancing mechanism of humanity where in-house people are constantly stressed. And I think the impact won't be that big because they always need to do more with less, and it's horrible and life is still complicated. Then I think many of the big law firms have counterbalancing mechanisms because other teams will benefit from it. But there will be an impact. And I think this will be from pyramid to rocket. The teams will get smaller, and legal will remain a very lucrative business, but for less people in total. That's my two.
I could see it. I hear that. I can also see the opposite. I could see opening up the doors, and assuming there's a shift in the education system, which I think is needed, I think there could be more lawyers or more paralegals or more professionals who have tools to support, because the biggest question, and this is what Clio always talks about, is the access to justice gap. And the reason people were scared, at least in my opinion, on there, you saw an ability for Clio to go direct to consumer with a lot of what they do. And I asked Jack about that, and he said, it's no, what he sees, like what LegalZoom did for lawyers, where they did a lot of automations on contracts, but for more complex things, then you can use a lawyer to help you. And that, to me, I see as the difference between big law and small, is how do you 4X the ability of lawyers to serve more clients through automated and software and things like that, or have just as the basic example, yesterday we were working on a contract. It was pretty basic. We just used ChatGPT. Like, yes, I am an attorney, but it was basic enough that a non-attorney in my firm was using that, and before we would hire somebody. So that, to me, I'm excited about it. And they always say it's the AI attorney who will replace the non-AI attorney who understands that. And so that is why I am trying to figure out how to best educate and train not only my team, but keep talking about it with the world, because this doesn't work anymore. And you cover your eyes and cover your ears, close your eyes. So thank you for that. Just to switch topics in the last few minutes that we have, I love talking about books. To me, books are the best return of a $15 investment that you can get in everything that you do. And I love to understand, as an entrepreneur or as an individual, what books have been impactful for you in your life. And sometimes people literally take out their phone and they look through their Kindle list, and if that's what you want to do. But I'm just curious, and I'm compiling, we actually are launching it in 2 weeks, a website with all the books recommended on this podcast that are searchable.
Yeah, nice. That's a good thing to do, actually. I need to get the author because I don't.
Fantastic. Yeah.
I need to be sure here we go.
I know there was a book that you mentioned. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's one. So there are many books on business and the changing business of legal and etc. But the book that changed the way how I think as an entrepreneur is a very soft book, if you want. It's a Culture Code, written by Daniel Coyle. I didn't remember his name. So Culture Code, it was recommended by my co-founder, who was always, I called him a little bit the mom of the company. He was not as tough. So three founders, 2 ex-lawyers, 1 product guy. And the 2 ex-lawyers from Big Law were used to work hard hours. We used to grind, and this old school way of thinking, like a lot of input equals a lot of output. There's no real work smart because you work in a big law firm. And so we're all smart. So if you say work smart, that's dumb because we all work smart. What the hell? And then this discussion about how to build an organization, and the book Culture Code was the one where you said, Michael, you need to read this. It's about enabling people to actually believe in a mission and be aligned and then be truly impactful. And basically the explanation that the real power comes from true alignment, that again comes from trust. And you know what, sometimes it's almost Trader Joe or like farmer's market. It's something that is right in theory, but it's not cool. Like for somebody to pitch you healthy food is sometimes hard. Now it's cool and it's nice, but it needs to be pitched, it needs to be cool. And the way how people collaborate in a sustainable way, it needed to be pitched to me to be cool. And that was the book Culture Code. So it describes how organizations work through trust if you're allowed to bring your full self and be immersed in work. And when you are able to not double guess others, when there's no like diplomacy needed, when people don't have to rewrite their email 7 times before they finally hit send, but they can just go to work, be immersed, and be full power. And this is what really drives organizations. And it's the book that changed the way I work. So I can recommend that a lot. It's if you've done this experiment with the marshmallows, I don't know if you know the marshmallow game where it's a funny game. Like it's a psychological experiment where apparently there were several teams competing each other in building a marshmallow tower where you only had like little sticks and marshmallows and you need to build a tower. And there are teams of engineers, like MIT engineers, competing against groups of, 7-year-olds. And ironically, the 7-year-olds often win. And the reason why they do is because in groups, they don't have this politeness and diplomatic thinking and ego. And you do it, no, I'm like this kind of thing where people have to double guess what other people are saying. They just get immersed in the task and as a group kind of rapidly iterate what works and do that. And they don't waste time and energy on the adult stuff. While the adults in the room, even if engineers, spend a lot of time in useless things in group building and how to do this and who takes the lead and who's right and wrong and arguing, so that I don't want to see the toddlers win, but the 7-year-old win over the engineers because they're immersed in the work. And
is this in the book?
Yeah, that's like the introduction of the book. And this is then when it starts. And there are many examples or anecdotes of when teams were incredibly impactful by not overthinking stuff on a diplomatic and adult and politeness level and translating this into an organization. If you want to build a high-performing team, allow people to just focus on the work without having to waste 20, 30% of their energy about how do I phrase that message? Will they really understand me? Like the political stuff that in bigger organizations even like stop.
Love that. So thank you for that. And I love, because everything you're saying, obviously we've heard in many different ways, but what you said was the Trader Joe's to farmer's market comment is it made it cool, right? It gave you the book, put it in a way that you understood it. Can I push you? Is there a second book that comes to mind that if you dig a little harder, that's been impactful on you?
Oh, many books. Now this goes into the long tail of stuff. Because I'm a deeply ironic person. I take everything with a grain of salt, and I actually don't believe in the books, and I think they're written by so I can't have to read them and I have to laugh at them. There's the one book. Who's the startup book about the guy who spent time at HubSpot? I have to name that. The guy who spent time at HubSpot and wrote about the time at HubSpot, and he was the staff writer for Silicon Valley, the TV series. So one of the TV series writers. Let me just look it up. So podcast. I don't know if you watched the TV show Silicon Valley.
I watched bits and pieces of it. I heard it was great. I barely have time to watch shows, and I want to.
Disrupted. Here we go. The book is called Disrupted, and the guy's
Okay.
Daniel Lyons. Here we go. Daniel Lyons. So he's I think, New York Times journalist who basically in the startup bubble decided to get hired by HubSpot. And he was there for, I don't know, a year. And then he wrote about his time there. And yeah, there is the whole boomer thing about him not getting it. Then there's also the people in the startup not doing crazy things. And he's just like observing that and being like, oh my God, what kind of world is that? But him describing this is hilarious. And it's very funny describing the weird world of startups. You learn a lot about what works and what doesn't work. And it impacted me just because it's a deeply ironic book. And he then went on and wrote the Silicon Valley series based on that stuff.
Love it. Love it.
I
I might just start a whole new podcast, just only talking about books, because I can dive into that for hours. Is there, if anything, other books come to mind, feel free to share them. But my other question, is there any other type of formal learning that you're currently doing at this stage in your career? Online courses, seminars that you go to, anything else, public speaking coaches, yoga coaches. It doesn't have to be about work, but anything else where you're hiring somebody to help you grow.
I am, if you don't take the hiring literally, if I basically have other people help me grow, then we go back to the sports thing. Like, you learn a lot when you do something completely different that is not where you're good at, and you have to basically do it again from scratch. So this is where triathlons come in. Like, you do this as a balance to your everyday life, where if you proceed, people respect you, you gain a voice, you have more gravitas in what you're doing. And then you have the hobby where you're bad at constantly and you're never good enough. That is a big school of life. And if you then have people there who coach you, and you have let's say, you need to be humble enough to actually listen to them. That is, I think, an important character trait that helps you there, but then again, helps you in business life. Yeah.
What's your current hobby that you're bad at?
Well, it's triathlon. Constantly.
Is it, so
it's 100%. It's triathlon. Yeah. I did an Ironman in the summer, and I first of all crashed into a car.
Congratulations!
So
wow.
It was, yeah,
but
a
moment. You did
slow.
an Ironman, a full Ironman.
Here we go. Yeah, but it was on the bucket list, but I was not as fast as I wanted to be. But it was a lesson in being humble and constantly being not as good as you want to be. And it's like the constant struggle, and also accepting the fact that you have limits. Here we go.
Yeah. So many people I know, I've run 3 marathons, and that was like enough on my knees, but like an Ironman, would you do it again?
I would, but not in the setting that I did it with, running a startup, having a very young kid, and then having the family having to support that. I would not do it again.
It's time. That's what interesting about marathon training, Ironman training. There's no way you can't AI it. There's no AI route out of training for it and the time that it takes to do it. Is there any takeaway that you would share with somebody from that experience? And maybe you just shared it about the humbling factor, but anything else from the learning and growing component? And I could share with you, just to give you an example afterwards, what my takeaways were from the marathon that I was able to apply to business.
The good thing about sports in general, and maybe Ironman is a special example because it's an endurance sport, but you are just showing up and not giving up gets you, I don't know, 80% of the way, most of the thing. Just show up and don't give up is already good enough.
Yeah.
That's like the thing, like, because if you set the alarm clock and you just get out of bed and you somehow make it on that bike at 4:30 in the morning and you just show up, that's the hardest part. And then you just keep going. And the interesting thing is, you can miss a training day. You can stop training even for a week. You can have a cold in between where you're not allowed to do anything. You can have a problem with your ankles, whatever. Your fitness doesn't decline that fast if you build on this consistently. So consistency beats everything. Like, essentially, consistency beats talent, consistency beats one-time efforts. And it's that consistency that builds it up. And you can then have issues in life, have issues with your company, whatever. If you are consistent, that's the winner. And that's maybe the only real business lesson I would get out of long-distance sports.
Well, consistency, the step before consistency would be keeping your commitment. Right? Because that's what, like, when I was training for the marathon, it doesn't matter if it was raining out, if it was freezing out, if you had to run 10 miles that day, you had to get up and do it. And like, that to me is there. And the second thing,
that's the showing up part. For me, that's totally the showing up part.
Yeah, same thing for sure. The part where you said nobody knows what they're doing, what is so great about training for a marathon or an Ironman is you know exactly what you're doing. For a marathon, you're running 6.2 miles. So all you have to do is focus on being mentally tough and physically tough, and you don't have to worry about the goal and the mission. The challenge in business is we don't know what we're doing. We're trying to figure it out as we go, and we have to be mentally tough. And so that was just a lesson to me in going through that process.
But I don't have the last word. You have that. But just to comment on that, I think like after mile 20 in a marathon, I would argue that you don't know what you're doing. There's something where you're like in no man's land and where all you have is like your processes and what you like prepared, but you're out there and then things can happen. You have cramps, digestion, anything. And the same is true for Ironman. Like you, at some point we are like out there and we just need to like.
I love that. And I would tell you this, mile 23 is where I hit my runner's wall, but there was one reason I was able to get through it. What do you think that was? Why was I able to get through my runner's wall?
You met somebody at the sideline who then reminded you of your training and yelled at you.
No. Do you think if I thought it was a 50-mile marathon, I could do it, or 100 miles? I knew it was 20. I knew I only had 3 miles left, right? 3.2. So that's just my thought. If I didn't know where the finish line was, which is how we do most of our life and business.
Oh yeah.
We hit the wall like, oh, fuck it, I'm done. And so that to me is the difference, is just the clear vision, and which many businesses do. And that's why we're always trying to do that. And I know I've taken up a lot of your time, and I know it's nighttime there. Or what time is it for you?
No, it's okay.
Okay, perfect. So just maybe 2 or 3 more questions. And it's so interesting because you run your podcast, and I'm curious if you have strategies when you do it, because what I find in this podcast, and maybe with some of them, is I find it's the second half of the podcast that I love more than the first half, where we get into the real conversation. We talk about what you love and what you grow and how you've been, versus the first part where we're getting to know each other and doing stuff. So to me, like, I feel my energy. I feel yours talking about it. What is your strategy with your podcast? One, I'm jealous that you have a good camera, and I might try doing that versus my webcam. At least for some of them, I saw you have a whole like studio set up. But when you're asking and interviewing people, how do you prepare for that?
To be honest, I just like the fact that if you have a platform, even if it's a small one, and you give the platform space, that you can have a better conversation with people and you can make it meaningful. So I think we could do the same by not having a podcast and just going around and basically say, look, I speak to people regularly, let's have a conversation. But by the fact that you make it explicit, I think this changed the entire game, the conversation, the people preparing for this. Well, the truth is all there. I think you can, if you overhear conversations at conferences, if you overhear people in businesses or in like professional environments having actual discussions about things, I think there's a lot to learn for people. So just put this into the spotlight and focus on this. I think this is where a lot of value is that is often overlooked. So I just enjoy the fact that I can have a conversation and make it meaningful and then make it shareable. That's all.
I'll 100% agree with you completely. And what my goal is in a podcast interview is to make you feel like you've discovered something or reaffirmed something that you know about yourself that gives you energy, that you've gone through that, versus having you say the 7 points that you say in every podcast, which leads to maybe my last question, or we can go further. But my last question, and we already started with it, but I'll dig a little deeper, because I asked you a question you said you've never been asked before, which was about your humor. And that's what I tried to do. Like, I don't think anyone cares to ask that, but I do. Is there topics when you think about your learning and growth journey that you don't get to talk about as much, that you wish people would dive deeper into, and instead you talk about the 7 things you always talk about? And I would love to give you an opportunity to think about that and share 1 or 2 things that would be a good way to end this podcast.
Yeah, look, we had such a beautiful conversation. I don't want to make it incredibly boring, but of course, in a time where everybody looks to the left and all you hear is AI, you need to remind people that not everything will be working with AI, and you need precision control, transparency, and some level of determinism for a use case, which is why you need workflows. But this is like our current, like it's, this is boring. We're not going to end the podcast like that. So
I thought you were going to say you need to be human. You need something. You're like, yeah, workflows with the possible.
You need to be human, of course. But it's like also funny. Like this is the funniest thing about this. Like it's circular. Like how in every hype you reach that point when people suddenly go, you know what? It's the human connection that matters most. Like it's almost like an inflection point in every hype. I saw it in like the machine learning stuff in, I don't know, 2017, 16, 17, it happened for the first time. Then there was no code, low code in 2019, 20, 21. Then the legal operations, CLM, everybody's CLM. But at the end, you always had this, what? It's also, don't forget the human connection. If this is like deeply funny, I think. It's like incredible. So yeah, of course it's about the human. I don't want to negotiate that, but it's funny that people bring that back.
Why you look left and right, there's so many conferences that are popping up or already happening. And I wonder, do you ever have that sort of feeling where you're looking around and you just feel like you can't do it all, or you're not where you want to be, where you've grown a lot, but where is your imposter syndrome right now? Let's add on we'll end on a vulnerable. What do you deal with right now in your challenges?
First of all, humor is you can't be a funny person without having some level of self like doubting yourself or making fun about yourself. Like you can't do that. If you're laughing, you're, I think 30, 40, 50% laughing about yourself. So there's a healthy reminder coming out of humor. I think that if people are funny people, I always like them a lot because they're usually having a funny view upon themselves, which keep their ego in check. It's very hard to be a very funny person, but not having your ego in check a little bit. And my imposter syndrome is, of course, related to that if you're in the investor world, in the grow faster, speed is a weapon, you need to think 10x, think 100x, like it's all about efficiency. That sometimes I'm actually thinking maybe I'm a too funny person, and maybe I'm not extreme enough in my way of, should I think more about scaling and efficiency in 7 a.m. in the morning instead of just laughing about how funny the world is?
No, look, I can relate. I'm a goofy person and I like making I have very dry humor, and that's who I am. Because I asked you to be vulnerable, I'll share my imposter syndrome is I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. And we've been profitable from day one. We're an 8-figure business. We've scaled. We have thousands of courses, an amazing team. The imposter syndrome is we are not the sexy legal tech company, right? We're not in the conversation with companies like Bryter and all other companies that have so much going on. And we're looked at as a continuing legal education company, and we do so much more. And that's why I'm actually speaking at the Legal Tech Fund Summit on the Scaling Up stage to show all the technology that we're building. But that is my imposter syndrome, where I think I should be here, right, off camera, and I feel here in my mind. And then, of course, you tell people that, what are you talking about, this or that? But that's just what lives in my head. And comparing is the root of all evil, obviously. So, this person's here or there. And to your point, my soul wants me to, I'm publishing a book in January about we moved to Barcelona for 2 years with my family. And so I do a lot of non-legal stuff outside of it. And so I'm always like, should I be at 7 a.m. working on, to your point, workflows and contract reviews? So thank you for sharing that as well. I'll give you the last word of this interview. Anything else want to share to impart on for yourself to remember, or just to put out there?
No, look, I think the root to everything is be yourself and be curious. I think we all learned that in the entire complicated movements of the world, the speed of change and everything around it. Like you just have to do what you actually want to do. Don't lie to yourself. Just go with the flow and do what you want to do and stay curious, and then you'll find your way. I think that's the guidance for a good life.
Said one of my favorite speeches, if you haven't seen it, is Steve Jobs' keynote commencement speech.
Stay hungry, stay curious.
I can watch
Stay
that.
Foolish. Stay hungry, stay foolish.
Yes, but curious is part of that. So cool. Thank you, Michael, so much. I will see you in a couple of weeks, and I look forward to continuing the conversation beyond.
Same.
All right.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.
See you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.